Hi, Brian.
Hi, Harry.
How are you?
Pretty good.
Yeah, I read your Power Vertical, and it's pretty popular also
Thanks.
in
Nice
Armenia
to
as
hear.
well. We will be talking about Vladimir Putin, and it seems to me that this year was not so good for him.
A bad start, yeah.
Yeah, bad start, really. And we've seen BBC's documentary on Putin as being corrupt, and Adam Zubin, the U.S. Treasury Acting Secretary for Terrorism and Financial Crimes, said in an interview with BBC on January 26 that Putin is a picture of corruption and secretly wealthy, corrupt, and focused on enriching his friends and political allies. On January 28, White House spokesman said that Zubin's statement actually reflects administration's view. This is pretty powerful confirmation,
And
right?
it's worth noting that Mr. Zubin is the Treasury Department official responsible for sanctions. So this is somebody that would be in a position to know something like this. Now, let's face it, this is not a great revelation. It's like saying the earth is round, the grass is green, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. We know Putin's corrupt. We know this. It's nothing new. But what's significant is that a U.S. official said this on camera, and that it reflects the view, and that the administration reiterated that this reflects the view of the administration. I think this is important for one very important reason, is that it shows the mask is coming off. I mean, just like the Litvinenko investigation that the UK announced last week, the results of which they announced last week tells us that that the Kremlin probably ordered this assassination. Putin probably was the one that ordered this. There's no doubt that the Russian state was behind it. We knew this. But the fact that this is coming out officially is actually highly significant, because it shows the mask has come off, where the Western powers are no longer even pretending that this regime is in any way, shape, or form respectable. And that's pretty significant. This is unprecedented for the post-Soviet period.
Consequences for such accusations? And
well, no, this was not. I know the Russian media was playing this up like it was like официальное обвинение. No, it was not. Only the Justice Department can do that. This is an American official speaking on camera with the authorization of the administration, expressing the administration's point of view, that this is a deeply, deeply corrupt regime. This is something I've been saying for years and years and years now. I'm glad to see that because governments, let's face it, they have to be a lot more careful and cautious in these statements than we journalists and pundits and commentators are. We can say whatever we want as long as it's true, but the governments have to be careful. They have to be more diplomatic. And the fact that the United States government is now willing to break this veneer of being diplomatic on this question with Putin, I think is highly significant. I don't see any concrete, specific consequences as a result of this, but it's a sign that the mask has come off.
Yeah, we will be. I mean, there are a lot of reports about Putin's wealth. That
we've been hearing this
more
40
than
billion,
40 billion, even more higher numbers are being reported. But the West is already starting officially, coming up with estimates, which is really. What do you think? What has been changed? What has been changed here? What's the change here?
Well, the change is over the past 2 years that Russia has been on a concerted campaign to upend the post-Cold War international order, starting with the annexation of Crimea, but also with many other things, cyber attacks on everything from a German steelmaker to the Polish stock exchange to the White House. They've been behaving like a rogue state. And all this time there was this hope among many Western leaders that we can just bring Putin back into the fold. They'll be troublesome, but we can get them back into the fold. I think people are understanding now that you're not going to get this guy back into the community of respectable nations anymore. And I think statements like this are a reflection of that. So,
and any Western leader who wants to meet him will, rather think twice before.
Yeah, well, I think you have to deal with Russia. Russia's too big to not deal with.
Yeah.
But how you deal with Russia, and previously, before the annexation of Crimea, Russia was treated like a partner. Now Russia's treated like something we have to deal with that's a problem. We're going to deal with Russia. We're going to deal with them with wide open eyes and a very cold heart.
But on the other hand, you see Kerry and John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov talking to each other as
they have
being
to talk to each
friends,
other 'cause
you know, the good friends. They talk to each other. They meet.
Diplomats will be diplomats.
Yeah.
Diplomats will be diplomats, and they're talking to each other because there's reason to talk.
I mean,
right
I'm
now.
sorry to interrupt you. We see all that there is no chemistry between Obama and Putin.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. But you could see some sort of chemistry, if not chemistry, but some sort of, you know, comfort that these two guys, Kerry and Lavrov,
That's
had.
Lavrov's job. He's the respectable face of this regime. He's the foreign minister. He's a diplomat. I've often likened Sergei Lavrov to a mafia lawyer, right? He's the respectable public face of what I consider a crime syndicate that's taken over a state. And Lavrov is very, very good at this. He's a smooth-talking guy. He's very friendly. He's very charming. And Kerry knows his role as as Secretary of State is to play along with that. So I wouldn't read too much into that. What I think is happening is that there is momentum for a deal on the Donbass conflict.
But like we say, you know, on one hand they're accusing Kremlin of being corrupt. On
Right.
the other hand, we see some indications that sanctions could be lifted.
Some
Kerry
of the
said
sanctions could be lifted.
it
Some
could
of
be
the sanctions
lifted,
could be lifted.
and it could take months.
Once Russia fulfills its obligations under the
Yeah.
Minsk II ceasefire, and that means giving the border, ultimately the border goes back to the control of the Ukrainians, which is where it always should be, then the sanctions that were put on Russia as a result of the Donbass conflict will be lifted. But not the sanctions that came on as a result of the annexation of Crimea. So it's not all the sanctions, but when you're saying on one hand we're saying Russia's corrupt, on the other hand Kerry's meeting with Lavrov, this reflects we're going to deal with Russia, but we're going to deal with Russia with wide open eyes and a very cold heart. I mean, it's the only way to deal with this Russia, is with wide open eyes and a cold heart.
Another comments that off the record comments, there are some indications that the meeting in Kaliningrad between Victoria Nuland and Vladislav Surkov was actually good. And good. There were
It's called a brainstorming session. Yeah. What's interesting right now is that Putin
It took 6 hours.
Yeah, 6 hours. It was interesting that it had to take place in Kaliningrad because Surkov could not go to Europe because of sanctions. But Putin has pulled out the big guns in Ukraine. Their names are Dmitry Kozak, who he's put in charge of kind of keeping the separatist rebels in line in Donbass. Boris Gryzlov, the former interior minister and former State Duma speaker, who flew to Kyiv for meetings with Petro Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine, and of course Vladislav Surkov, the gray cardinal of the Kremlin, who's now meeting with Nuland. Yeah, he's pulled out some of his big guns diplomatically because I think there is some momentum. Putin needs a settlement right now. Putin really needs for at least some of the sanctions, the tier 3 sanctions.
So which means that they got the message and the sanctions hurt?
Sanctions in conjunction with the oil price hurt. The two together was a perfect storm. Because Russia's economy is so unreformed, so dependent on commodities, that when that oil price goes down, that economy is in trouble. And the oil price is down. It's inched up the last couple of days, but I see that as a temporary phenomenon, quite frankly. But if you add the sanctions onto that, Moscow has no access to Western credits, so they have no liquidity. And so they need a deal in Ukraine right now. But this is the rub. I mean, they can't bring themselves to give what they have to give, and that's to leave Ukraine alone.
And another question about, if the sanctions are working or that people feel the impact of the sanctions. And also, we can say that this, the very fact that polls showing that, Putin's popularity is on a decline.
From 89% to 82%. I don't.
Is it a big deal? Or?
I mean, I think the trend is interesting. I don't put too much stock in polls in Russia because of different factors. On one hand, whom are you measuring Putin against? The polls, when you're measuring President Obama's popularity, you're measuring it against the Republicans, right? When you measure David Cameron's popularity, you're measuring it against the Labor Party.
So there's
right?
no one...
There's nothing to measure Putin against. That's number one. Number two, a recent interesting poll that the Levada Center did showed that a large percentage of Russians are afraid to tell pollsters what they really think.
Okay,
So
they're not accurate.
But
actually.
that said, this is significant. That his poll numbers have dropped, and quite frankly, it's not surprising. I mean, really, Russians' disposable incomes last year declined by 9.5%. 9.5%. Russians are cutting their household budgets. This is hurting the ordinary person. Now, the old battle in Russia has been between the refrigerator and the television, right? The television's telling everybody we're a great power and we've gotten up from our knees and we're sticking it to the evil West. And the refrigerator's telling us, we can't live this way anymore. Well, up until now, the refrigerator's been losing the fight. The television's been winning. But I'm beginning to think maybe it's a matter of time before the refrigerator starts winning. And maybe this dip in Putin's poll numbers is the first sign of that. Putin knows he needs a deal in Ukraine. But he can't bring himself, and this is going to be the tricky thing, he can't bring, because he wants the separatist entities, the so-called DNR and LNR, reintegrated into Ukraine as they are. Yeah. With pretty much with quasi-autonomous status. Ukraine says they'll be reintegrated after we get the border back, and they'll be integrated when there's elections according to Ukrainian
Is it doable,
law.
you think?
What's that?
Is it doable?
Is what doable? Getting him back on. This is what we're going to learn in the next couple of months, because what I always expected.
The Russians are skeptical that Ukrainians will not, accept the Minsk II.
Well, that's because actually a frozen conflict actually suits Kyiv. A frozen conflict in a lot of ways suits Kyiv, because the rest of Ukraine can get on with reforming their economy, reforming their political system, and moving closer to the West, and leaving what is essentially 5% of their territory behind. Now, there's an emotional issue here, and nobody wants to give up territory. These are Ukrainian citizens, after all, and but Poroshenko's been able to call Putin's bluff because Poroshenko can live with a frozen conflict. Putin can't, because a frozen conflict means sanctions continue.
Thank
you
very much. It was very interesting analysis. Thank you, Brian.
It's always a pleasure, Harry.